Infidelity is not always the worst betrayal. When Margaret discovered her husband's shocking secret, she never imagined what she would find. The truth was far more complex, challenging everything Margaret thought she knew about love and loyalty. This years-long love story challenges everything you thought you knew about trust and commitment. In just a few minutes, you'll discover the counterintuitive truth that is inspiring people to survive their darkest hours. This twist will change the way you look at relationships forever. Welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Margaret hummed softly as she folded laundry, the scent of lavender filling the room. Retirement from her librarian career had given her more time for household tasks, which she found oddly comforting. As she reached into Tom's jacket pocket, her fingers brushed against something unexpected. Curious, she pulled out a crumpled receipt from an unfamiliar bistro, dated last night when Tom had claimed he was working late. Margaret's brow furrowed as she smoothed out the paper. It was unlike Tom to keep secrets, not after 30 years of marriage built on trust and openness. Continuing her task, Margaret's hand found something else, a sleek, unfamiliar phone. Her heart raced as she examined the device, so different from Tom's usual one. With trembling hands, she powered it on, revealing a list of calls and messages to an unknown number. The sight left her breathless, her comfortable routine suddenly disrupted by uncertainty. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, the laundry forgotten. Why would Tom need a second phone? Who was he contacting? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room as she grappled with the possibility that her marriage harbored secrets she never imagined. As Margaret's mind raced with possibilities, she heard Tom's key in the lock. The familiar sound, once a source of comfort, now sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She quickly tucked the phone and receipt into her pocket, not ready to confront him without more information. Tom entered, his warm smile faltering as he noticed Margaret's serious expression. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, hanging up his coat. Margaret forced a smile, buying time to collect her thoughts. "Just tired," she lied, hating how easily the deception came. "How was work?" Tom launched into a detailed account of his day, but Margaret found it hard to focus. She watched him closely, searching for signs of guilt or nervousness. Was he always this animated when talking about work? Or was he overcompensating? As Tom moved around the kitchen, starting dinner preparations, Margaret felt a growing distance between them. The easy companionship they'd shared for decades now felt strained, tainted by the weight of unspoken questions. She knew she couldn't let this go on for long. Soon, she'd have to confront Tom with what she'd found. But first, she needed to gather her thoughts and decide on the best approach. The next morning, after a restless night, Margaret met her friend Linda at their favorite cafe. The familiar clatter of dishes provided a comforting backdrop as Margaret poured out her heart, recounting the previous day's discoveries and her growing suspicions. Linda listened intently, her face a mix of concern and disbelief. "Oh, Margaret," she sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze her friend's hand. "I can't believe Tom would keep secrets from you. After all these years." She shook her head, clearly struggling to reconcile this new information with the Tom she thought she knew. Margaret nodded, blinking back tears. "I don't want to believe it either, Linda, but I can't ignore what's right in front of me. I need to know the truth, whatever it is." Linda's eyes lit up with determination. "Then we'll find out," she declared, lowering her voice. "We'll do some digging. Follow him if we have to. You deserve to know what's going on, Margaret." Part of Margaret recoiled at the idea of spying on her husband, but a larger part, the part that had lain awake imagining worst-case scenarios, nodded in agreement. As they left the cafe, a plan forming between them, Margaret felt a mix of guilt and resolve. She never thought she'd be the type to investigate her husband, but she also never thought Tom would give her reason to. The crisp autumn air contrasted sharply with the chill of uncertainty in her heart. Whatever the truth was, she was determined to uncover it, even if it meant challenging everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Linda gave her a tight hug before they parted ways. "Remember, I'm here for you, no matter what," she said firmly. Margaret clung to that promise as she headed home, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Over the next few days, Margaret found herself hyper-aware of Tom's every move. She noted the times he left for work and returned home, listening carefully to his phone conversations and watching for any inconsistencies in his behavior. Tom seemed oblivious to her scrutiny, carrying on as usual with his cheerful demeanor and affectionate gestures. This normalcy only served to deepen Margaret's confusion. How could he act so natural if he was hiding something significant? The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, and Margaret found herself withdrawing, making excuses to avoid intimate moments with Tom. She couldn't bear the thought of being close to him while harboring such doubts. A week after her discovery, Margaret found herself sitting in her car across the street from Tom's office, her heart pounding. She'd told Tom she was meeting Linda for lunch, hating herself for the lie but unable to shake the need to know the truth. As the minutes ticked by, Margaret's resolve wavered. Was she really going to do this? Follow her husband like some sort of amateur detective? Just as she was about to start the car and leave, she saw Tom exit the building. To her surprise, he wasn't alone. A woman Margaret had never seen before was with him, and they were deep in conversation. Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she watched Tom help the woman into his car. The woman was thin, almost frail-looking, and Tom's gestures towards her were gentle and solicitous. They drove off, and Margaret found herself following at a discreet distance, her mind racing. Who was this woman? Why hadn't Tom ever mentioned her? As they wound through unfamiliar streets, Margaret's imagination conjured up increasingly distressing scenarios. Were they heading to a romantic rendezvous? Was this mysterious woman the reason for Tom's secretive behavior? The car finally came to a stop in front of a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Margaret parked a little way down the street, her hands shaking as she watched Tom help the woman out of the car and into the house. They disappeared inside, leaving Margaret alone with her tumultuous thoughts. She sat there for what felt like hours, torn between marching up to the house to demand answers and driving away to pretend she'd never seen any of this. When Tom finally emerged, his face was etched with an emotion Margaret couldn't quite decipher. Was it worry? Guilt? Tenderness? As Tom drove away, Margaret found herself walking towards the house, her legs moving of their own accord. In the lobby, she scanned the names on the mailboxes, searching for any clue. Her breath caught as she spotted a familiar surname, Anderson. It was the last name of Tom's college friend, Lisa. Margaret stumbled back, her mind reeling. Why would Tom be visiting Lisa after all these years? And why keep it a secret? As she made her way back to her car, Margaret felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the certainties of her life crumbling away. She needed answers, and she needed them now. It was time to confront Tom. Margaret spent the drive home rehearsing what she would say to Tom. Her emotions oscillated between anger, hurt, and confusion. As she pulled into their driveway, she saw Tom's car already there. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself for the conversation ahead. She found Tom in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if it were any other evening. "We need to talk," Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. Tom turned, surprise flickering across his face at her serious tone. "Sure, honey. What's on your mind?" Margaret placed the mysterious phone and receipt on the kitchen counter. "I found these in your jacket," she began, watching Tom's face carefully. "And today, I saw you with a woman. You took her to Lisa Anderson's house." She paused, giving Tom a chance to explain. The color drained from his face as he stared at the items, then back at Margaret. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "Margaret, I can explain," he finally said, his voice shaky. "It's not what you think." Margaret felt a mix of relief and frustration at his words. "Then what is it, Tom? Because right now, I'm thinking the worst." Tom sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking older and more vulnerable than Margaret had ever seen him. "Lisa is sick," he said softly. "Terminal cancer. She reached out to me a few months ago, needing help. She has no family left, no close friends. I've been helping with her medical bills, taking her to appointments." As Tom's explanation unfolded, Margaret felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief that there was no affair, anger at being kept in the dark, and a growing sense of compassion for both Tom and Lisa. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom's shoulders slumped. "I was ashamed," he admitted. "Ashamed that I was dipping into our savings without telling you. Ashamed that I still felt responsible for Lisa after all these years. I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that you'd think—" He trailed off. unable to voice the very suspicion that had been tormenting Margaret for weeks. The irony wasn't lost on her. His attempt to protect their relationship had nearly destroyed it. As the full story came to light, Margaret realized that the truth was far more complex than she had imagined, challenging her to re-examine her understanding of love, loyalty, and the lingering bonds of past relationships. In the days that followed their confrontation, Margaret found herself grappling with a storm of conflicting emotions. Relief warred with lingering anger, understanding with hurt. She spent hours walking in the park near their home, trying to sort through her feelings. On one hand, she was deeply touched by Tom's compassion for Lisa. Wasn't this the man she had fallen in love with? Kind, caring, always ready to help others? But on the other hand, the secrecy stung. Years of marriage, of sharing every aspect of their lives, and Tom had chosen to keep this from her. As she sat on a park bench, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand, Margaret reflected on the meaning of marriage vows. In sickness and in health, they had promised. But did those vows extend to past relationships? Where did one draw the line between compassion and loyalty? She thought about Lisa, facing her mortality alone, and felt a pang of empathy. If their situations were reversed, wouldn't she want Tom to have someone to lean on? Still, the breach of trust gnawed at her. Trust, once broken, felt fragile and difficult to rebuild. At home, Tom was giving Margaret space while also making efforts to rebuild their connection. He left little notes for her around the house, expressing his love and regret. He was more open about his days, sharing details about Lisa's condition and the help he was providing. Margaret appreciated these gestures, but she still felt a distance between them. The ease and comfort of their long marriage had been disrupted, and she wasn't sure how to get it back. She found herself studying Tom when he wasn't looking, trying to reconcile this new, more complex version of him with the man she thought she knew completely. As the days passed, Margaret's anger began to subside, replaced by a deep sadness for the pain Lisa must be going through, and a growing admiration for Tom's dedication to helping her. She realized that while Tom's methods were misguided, his intentions were pure. One evening, as they sat in silence watching TV, Margaret reached out and took Tom's hand. He looked at her, surprise and hope in his eyes. "I want to meet her," Margaret said softly. "Lisa, I want to understand." Tom squeezed her hand, tears welling in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The following Saturday, Margaret found herself standing outside Lisa's apartment, her heart racing. Tom squeezed her hand reassuringly as he knocked on the door. Moments later, it opened to reveal a frail woman with a warm smile. "You must be Margaret," Lisa said, her voice weak but welcoming. "I've been hoping to meet you." As they settled in Lisa's small living room, Margaret was struck by the photos on the walls, memories of a life she knew nothing about, including some of Tom from years ago. The initial awkwardness slowly gave way to conversation as Lisa spoke of her illness, her fears, and her gratitude for Tom's help. Margaret listened intently, her preconceptions gradually melting away as she saw not a rival, but a vulnerable human being facing her mortality with grace. Lisa's cancer had spread aggressively, leaving her with limited treatment options and a prognosis of only a few months. As Lisa described her lonely battle with the disease before reaching out to Tom, Margaret felt a surge of compassion. She began to understand the depth of Tom's commitment to helping his old friend, even as she still struggled with his decision to keep it secret. "I never meant to come between you," Lisa said softly, her eyes moving between Margaret and Tom. "When I reached out to Tom, I had no one else. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." Margaret felt a lump in her throat, moved by Lisa's sincerity. She reached out, taking Lisa's hand in hers. "We're here now," she said, surprising herself with the depth of her compassion. "We'll face this together." As the afternoon wore on, Margaret found herself drawn into Lisa's world. They shared stories, laughed over old photos, and talked about Lisa's bucket list, simple things she wanted to experience in her remaining time. By the time they left, Margaret felt a shift within herself. The woman she had feared and resented was now someone she felt compelled to help. As they drove home, Margaret looked at Tom, seeing him in a new light. Not just as her husband, but as a man capable of great kindness and sacrifice. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said softly. Tom glanced at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for coming," he replied. "For understanding." Margaret nodded, realizing that while the road ahead would not be easy, she felt stronger, more certain of their ability to weather this storm together. The breach in their relationship wasn't fully healed, but a bridge was being built, founded on newfound understanding and shared purpose. As Margaret and Tom settled into their new routine of caring for Lisa, they couldn't help but notice the whispers and curious glances from neighbors and friends. The small-town grapevine had been buzzing with speculation about Tom's frequent visits to an unknown woman's apartment. Now, with Margaret openly involved, the rumors took on a new life. One afternoon, while tending to her garden, Margaret overheard her next-door neighbor gossiping on the phone. "Can you believe it? Tom's old friend. And Margaret's just going along with it. If it were me." Margaret's cheeks burned with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The incident prompted Margaret and Tom to be more open about their situation. They decided to host a small gathering for their closest friends, including Linda, to explain Lisa's illness and their decision to support her. As they prepared for the event, Margaret felt a mix of anxiety and relief. It would be challenging to share such a personal story, but she was tired of the secrecy and speculation. The night of the gathering, their living room was filled with a nervous energy as friends arrived, clearly curious about the reason for this unusual meeting. Tom took the lead, explaining Lisa's situation and his initial decision to help her secretly. Margaret then shared her discovery, her fears, and ultimately, her decision to support both Tom and Lisa. The reactions were mixed. Some, like Linda, were immediately supportive, while others struggled to understand. "You're a better woman than me," one friend remarked to Margaret, shaking her head in disbelief. As the evening wound down, Margaret felt a sense of relief. The truth was out, for better or worse. She and Tom stood united, facing their community with honesty and dignity. Linda pulled Margaret aside, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry I jumped to conclusions," she said, hugging her friend tightly. "You and Tom, you're showing us all what real love and commitment look like." Margaret returned the hug, grateful for her friend's support and understanding. As their last guest left, Tom wrapped his arm around Margaret's waist. "Thank you," he whispered. Margaret leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his gratitude. They still had challenges ahead, but for the first time in weeks, she felt truly connected to her husband, their shared purpose bringing them closer than ever. As autumn leaves turned vibrant shades of red and gold, Margaret, Tom, and Lisa fell into a rhythm that none of them could have anticipated months earlier. Margaret found herself spending more time at Lisa's apartment, often bringing home-cooked meals or simply sitting with her, sharing stories and laughter. The initial awkwardness had given way to a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. They talked about Lisa's life before her illness, her dreams, and her regrets. Margaret was surprised to find how much she enjoyed these conversations, how much she was learning not just about Lisa, but about herself. Lisa's condition fluctuated. Some days she was almost her old self, full of energy and optimism. Other days the pain and fatigue kept her bedridden. Margaret and Tom adjusted their schedules accordingly, tag-teaming to ensure Lisa was never alone for long. They celebrated small victories, a good medical report, a day without pain, and comforted each other through the setbacks. Tom watched the growing bond between his wife and Lisa with a mixture of relief and admiration. One evening, as he and Margaret walked home from Lisa's apartment, he squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "For understanding, for being so incredible through all of this." As Lisa's health declined, her bucket list became a priority. Margaret and Tom worked together to fulfill as many of Lisa's wishes as possible. They organized a small art show featuring Lisa's paintings, took her on a picnic in the countryside, and helped her reconnect with old friends via video calls. Each completed item brought a light to Lisa's eyes that seemed to push back the encroaching shadows of her illness. Margaret found herself deeply moved by these experiences, realizing how precious and fleeting life could be. She began to look at her own life differently, appreciating the small moments and finding joy in simple pleasures. As Thanksgiving approached, Margaret suggested they host dinner at their home, with Lisa as the guest of honor. The idea of having her husband's former friend at their holiday table might have once seemed absurd, but now it felt right. As they planned the menu and discussed seating arrangements, Margaret realized how much her perspective had shifted. This wasn't about rivalry or jealousy anymore. It was about compassion, family, and the complex, beautiful ways that love could manifest. Tom agreed enthusiastically, his eyes shining with gratitude and love. Together, they began preparing for a Thanksgiving that would be unlike any other they had experienced. The day of Thanksgiving arrived, crisp and clear. Margaret busied herself in the kitchen, the familiar rituals of cooking bringing a sense of normalcy to this extraordinary situation. Tom went to pick up Lisa, who had insisted on bringing her famous cranberry sauce, despite her weakened state. As Margaret heard their voices in the hallway, she took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and went to greet them with a warm smile. Lisa looked frailer than ever, but her eyes sparkled with excitement as Tom wheeled her into the festively decorated living room. The meal was a blend of poignant and joyful moments. Lisa, propped up with pillows in her wheelchair, regaled them with stories from her and Tom's college days, filling in gaps of history Margaret had never known. There were moments of laughter, moments of quiet reflection, and moments when the weight of Lisa's illness hung heavy in the air. But through it all, there was a sense of connection, of family redefined. As they enjoyed pumpkin pie, Lisa raised her glass in a toast. "To old friends and new beginnings," she said, her voice weak but full of emotion, "and to love that knows no boundaries." As the evening wound down, Margaret found herself alone with Lisa in the living room. Lisa reached out, taking Margaret's hand in her frail grip. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "For sharing your husband, your home, your heart. You've given me peace in my final days." Margaret felt her own eyes well up as she squeezed Lisa's hand gently. "We're family now," she said softly. "All of us." The moment was interrupted by a fit of coughing from Lisa, a stark reminder of her deteriorating condition. Margaret helped her sip some water, her heart heavy with the knowledge that their time together was limited. After Tom took Lisa home, he and Margaret sat in silence, processing the emotions of the day. "She doesn't have much time left, does she?" Margaret asked softly. Tom shook his head, his eyes glistening with tears. "The doctors say it could be weeks, maybe days." Margaret leaned into him, offering comfort even as she sought it herself. As they cleared the table and washed dishes together, they talked about the coming days, making plans to ensure Lisa's comfort and care. Despite the sadness, Margaret felt a deep sense of purpose and unity with Tom. They were in this together, facing whatever came next as a team. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, Lisa's condition deteriorated rapidly. The visits to her apartment became more frequent, the conversations more hushed. Margaret and Tom took turns staying overnight, ensuring Lisa was comfortable and cared for. They read to her, played her favorite music, and simply sat with her in companionable silence when words became too difficult. The hospice nurse became a regular presence, gently guiding them through Lisa's final journey. One particularly difficult night, as Margaret sat by Lisa's bedside, Lisa stirred from a fitful sleep. "Margaret," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need you to know. Tom never stopped loving you, even when we were young. It was always you." Margaret felt tears welling up as she squeezed Lisa's hand. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm grateful for the love you've brought into our lives." Lisa smiled weakly before drifting back to sleep. Margaret sat there, overwhelmed by the complexity of human relationships and the capacity of the heart to expand and embrace unexpected connections. As December arrived, bringing with it a blanket of snow, Lisa's lucid moments became rarer. Margaret and Tom found themselves cherishing every coherent word, every moment of recognition. They continued to work through Lisa's bucket list, bringing the world to her bedside when she could no longer go out. They created a mini art gallery in her room with her paintings, brought in musicians to play her favorite songs, and even arranged a virtual tour of the Louvre, a place Lisa had always dreamed of visiting. On a quiet winter morning, with Margaret and Tom at her bedside, Lisa took her last breath. The room was filled with a profound sense of peace, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that a remarkable journey had come to an end. As Margaret held Tom while he wept, she realized that their lives had been forever changed by this experience. The woman who had once been a source of fear and jealousy had become family, teaching them about love, forgiveness, and the preciousness of life. The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements and well-wishers. Margaret was touched by the outpouring of support from their community. Many of the same neighbors who had once gossiped now brought casseroles and offered condolences. Linda was a constant presence, helping with practical matters and providing emotional support. Through it all, Margaret and Tom leaned on each other, their bond stronger than ever. As they sorted through Lisa's belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate, Margaret and Tom found themselves reminiscing about the past few months. They laughed at the memory of Lisa's terrible jokes, shed tears over the photos of her healthier days, and marveled at the unexpected friendship that had blossomed. Margaret came across a letter addressed to her, written in Lisa's shaky hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "Dear Margaret," it began, "I want you to know what a gift you've been. Your forgiveness and kindness have shown me the true meaning of love. Take care of Tom, but also let him take care of you. You two have something special. Cherish it. Thank you for making my last chapter a beautiful one." In the quiet evenings that followed, as they adjusted to life without Lisa, Margaret and Tom found themselves having deep conversations about love, forgiveness, and the nature of commitment. They realized that their experience had given them a unique perspective on marriage and relationships. "We should share this," Tom said one night, his eyes lighting up with an idea. "Maybe our story could help others facing similar challenges." Margaret nodded, feeling a sense of purpose growing within her. They began to explore ways to reach out to their community, to offer support to couples navigating unexpected trials in their relationships. As winter turned to spring, Margaret and Tom found themselves embarking on a new chapter in their lives. They started a support group at their local community center, sharing their story and providing a safe space for others to discuss their relationship challenges. The group quickly grew, attracting couples dealing with everything from infidelity to caring for aging parents. Margaret and Tom found that helping others navigate difficult times brought them even closer together, their shared purpose strengthening their bond in ways they never expected. 6 months after Lisa's passing, Margaret stood nervously in front of a small group gathered in the community center. Tom squeezed her hand reassuringly as she began to speak. "We're here today to start a support group for couples facing unexpected challenges in their relationships," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Our journey taught us that love can take many forms, and that forgiveness and understanding can strengthen even the most tested bonds." As Margaret and Tom shared their story, they saw hope rekindled in the eyes of those struggling with their own battles. One couple was dealing with a spouse's long-lost child suddenly appearing in their lives. Another was grappling with the care of aging parents. Each situation was unique, but the themes of trust, communication, and compassion resonated with everyone in the room. As the meeting progressed, Margaret felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since her librarian days. She realized that their painful journey had equipped them with valuable insights that could help others. The support group became a regular fixture in their lives, growing in size and impact. Margaret and Tom found themselves looking forward to each meeting, energized by the connections they were making and the healing they were witnessing. They celebrated milestones with the group members, reconciliations, renewed vows, and personal growth. Each success story felt like a tribute to Lisa's memory and a validation of the difficult path they had walked. On their 35th wedding anniversary, Margaret and Tom decided to take a walk through the park where Margaret had once grappled with her doubts. As they strolled hand in hand, Tom turned to her with a smile. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for everything we went through with Lisa. It made us stronger." Margaret nodded, leaning into him. "Me too," she said softly. "It taught us that love isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues, they headed home, their steps in sync, their hearts full. They had weathered a storm that could have torn them apart, emerging stronger, more compassionate, and more deeply in love than ever before. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was a life rich with meaning, bound by an unbreakable love that had been tested by fire and emerged pure gold. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Please leave a comment with your views. I'm sure there will be new videos on this channel that will thrill you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Until next time.